Okay, folks, here we are. This is the last lecture I'm going to give on Hinduism for this class. You'll see there's a couple other chapters in there that go into, Hinduism is a deep, long-standing religion, as we've already explored, but there's even more to it. Of course, you're not going to be tested on those other three chapters, but if you want to know more, I suggest reading them. Next, we'll move to Buddhism. But the last thing I want to address is, as the title of this video suggests, what about the gods? If you just pull somebody off the street in America and you ask them, what's Hinduism about? They might say reincarnation and karma, but they might also say a shitload of gods, a whole bunch of gods, in some accounts, thousands and thousands. So there's a few different things to unpack here. The first thing is that the reason I haven't mentioned the gods too much is that this is a class on Asian philosophy, not Asian religion. Right? So we're dealing, that's why I focused on Vedanta, which, as I keep saying, is really the core of Hindu philosophy. But the gods are connected in some ways, and in some ways they gave rise to the philosophy. If you go back to the first couple chapters of the book, one of my favorite gods is Agni, the god of fire. And during the Vedic period, as Hinduism was developing thousands of years ago, one of the coolest visions you get is of, they would draw a circle around the fire and only the priest class was allowed in, who supposedly were connected to the gods. They'd be, dressed up in different attire and dancing. And they take soma, which is that, drug that was probably psilocybin or something like it, the hallucinogen. And they were trying to channel the god Agni, who's the god of fire, through this, what was probably a big bonfire. And so it's just, whether you believe it or not, it's just kind of cool to think about. Imagine going back in time and seeing one of those ceremonies. But over time, there were three other central gods that really took form in Hinduism. And those are the ones I just want to talk about briefly in this video, just because I feel like if you're going to learn about Hinduism, you should learn about those three central gods. And but first, just to talk about how the gods are often thought of in relation to Hinduism, it depends on the sect of Hinduism, actually. And some believe the gods are real. A lot of people who study Hinduism and Hindus themselves, so some Hindus, and many in fact, they see the gods more as metaphors for a higher, deeper reality. So in the same way that there's a multiplicity of forms, in the Maya, the gods are sort of in some ways a part of Maya, but more deeply connected to Brahman. Again, it depends on who you ask. Some people will consider that as a part of that word panentheism. Right? Panentheism sometimes can suggest, sometimes can be described as God is within us, because God is an immanent being. The universe is actually contained by God. God is greater than that. So in this case, I'm thinking of Brahman, the Godhead or the ultimate God. And so in that sense, it's panentheistic in the sense that the other gods are just sort of offshoots of, or sometimes they're called avatars of the greater God within the universe. And so they're just sort of a metaphor for helping us understand Brahman, right? Another way to say it is they're different names for God, right? They're different names for Brahman, more specific ways that Brahman works out his magic and so forth. So there's a story in the Upanishads that I think really gets at this idea of the multiplicity of gods really being reduced to one. And you'll probably see where the story is going, but it's short. I'll tell it briefly. So you have a master and a student. The student's trying to learn about Brahman and moving towards his moksha and moving towards his the cycle of samsara, so he can release ego and so forth and become liberated. And he asked the master, he says, well, in my path, I see that there's these many, many gods, sometimes by some accounts as many as 33,000 gods, and he says to the master, he says, I understand there's all these gods, but, which one should I really focus on? And the master says, well, we say 33,000, but the really important ones to focus on, there's really just 3,300. There's really just 3,300 gods. And the student says, okay, that's a little more manageable, but still 3,300 gods is quite a lot of gods. What should I really focus on? Of those 3,300, what's the god I should focus on? And the master says, well, yeah, you're right. It's still kind of unmanageable. Really, the really good amount of gods you should focus on is really just, 330. But you should focus on 330. And, the student goes, okay, so, all right, I'll focus on the 330. But then he thinks again and says, well, 330 is still a lot of gods. Most religions don't have that many gods. So of those 330, what are the really important ones that I should focus on? And the master says, yeah, you're right. Okay. Really, there's just 33, right? And sensing a pattern, as I'm sure you guys are, and the student senses, he says, all right, 33. And then the student says, okay, but 33 is still a lot of gods. How many gods are there really? And this time the master says, well, really, there's just 3. Right? And I'll tell you what those 3 are in a minute. But the student says, okay, well, among those 3, there's got to be one that's really the most important. And that's when the master relents and says, well, really, there's just one. And the student says, Master, why did you tell me there was 33,000? Like, why did you tell me there were so many if there's really just one? And he said, well, all of those other thousands of gods are just other ways that the one expresses himself, right? They're just different names, different parts of the actions of the one. So, of course, that one would be Brahman. And again, in all of Hinduism, there runs through that idea of a grander reality of Brahman. But if we want to focus on those 3 gods that the master referred to, and I just want to give you a brief overview, and again, with the caveat that they're understood and discussed differently depending on the different sect of Hinduism you're part of, even maybe coming down to the different Sangha or group of people who talk about them. The first one is the Brahma, the creator god. Now, I know this is hard to keep, I'm not going to test you on the specific names of the gods, but just to give you an overview. But it's hard to keep this straight because we already have Brahmins, the Brahmin class or the priest class. We have Brahman with the A-N, which refers to the grand reality, and Brahma, just kind of getting rid of the N and having the A. That's the creator god, right? The one who created the world. And kind of unlike in Christianity and Islam, though, this god kind of creates the world and just leaves and does his own thing. Not only that, but the creator god isn't really the origin of everything. The origin of everything is often said to be the other god, Vishnu, who, by the way, if you remember from, those of you who have taken a look at the Bhagavad Gita, you'll see that the character Krishna reveals himself to be an avatar or incarnation of Vishnu. And so Vishnu is usually defined or translated as the preserver god, right? The god who keeps everything together, keeps all the glue together. And actually, sort of in an ironic way, he sort of gives rise to the creator god Brahma. And the story that's often given there, it's really a beautiful piece of mythology. If you see it as mythology, I mean, I don't mean to discount anybody who believes it, because one person's mythology is another person's religion. But in any case, it's just kind of a beautiful story, because the way it's often depicted, and if you look it up online, you'll see pictures of this. It's depicted as Vishnu, the preserver god, kind of sleeping on the grand ocean of the universe, that is not just the universe, but everything, the grand ocean of reality, and his eyes are closed. And every time he opens his eyes, out of his navel or his belly button sprouts a lotus flower, right? A lotus flower sprouts. And on that flower is Brahman, a creator god. And he creates a single universe, right? And then Vishnu closes his eyes and the flower goes back into his navel. And then he opens his eyes again, and by the dream of Vishnu, another Brahman god comes out and creates another universe. And then he closes his eyes and the flower goes back into his navel, and so forth. And, and that sort of goes on for all eternity, right? So we're just part of one universe, of one of many, many universes that's the dream of Vishnu. And just kind of a really beautiful image, in my opinion. And Vishnu is also known to send avatars into the world. Like I said, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita is an avatar. But there's others within Hinduism that I won't go into, that you can look up if you're interested. But notice that that's a similar idea in other religions, like in particular Christianity. Is Jesus not in some ways an avatar of the Father, right? The Yahweh, the creator God of Christianity? Right? That idea of there being humans that come to, who are basically God in human form, that come to help and save humans, that's a motif that we see in different religions. And one of the cool things I like about the story of Vishnu and Brahma and the sprouting lotus is that the idea of a lotus flower, as we'll see when we talk about Buddhism, is going to play a really large role in Buddhism. Because the lotus flower, which is very popular flower you'll see in the East and in India in particular, in China as well, the lotus flower is this beautiful flower, but it actually sprouts out of usually muddy water. And so there's a metaphor in Buddhism that's the depiction of our lives, of what enlightenment is really like, is that the enlightened being will sprout out of the mud of life, metaphorically speaking, and sprout into this beautiful flower. And then they will simply die and wither back in and go back into the water. And then the next season, a new flower will sprout. And so this doesn't just illustrate enlightenment and the cycle of life, but it illustrates the idea of impermanence, that we should appreciate. I haven't talked much about impermanence, a little bit. We'll talk about it more in Buddhism, but impermanence is the idea that the physical forms we're in we're all going to die, right? It's all going to go away someday. And so that metaphor of the lotus flower sprouting and going back into the mud is a metaphor for our lives, which instead of worrying and fretting and getting angry and sad that the flower will wither and die, just appreciate the beauty of the flower while it's there, right? Appreciate that in fact, the very fact that it will die makes it even more beautiful, that it's not permanent from that point of view. But anyways, I just wanted to make that connection to Buddha. And actually, the idea of destruction is a nice segue into the last of those three gods that the master mentioned to the student in that story, which is Shiva. Right? Shiva is sometimes pictured in this little thing called the Nataraja, which you may have seen it before. It kind of shows Shiva dancing and his arms going in different directions, and it's in a little circle. And it's no mistake that he is often discussed as the Lord of the dance, but also the god of destruction, right? So, but the whole idea that they have a god of destruction is actually illustrating the idea that destruction is part of creation. It's not something we can really get away from. Things are going to die and be destroyed. And from those things, like right when the lotus flower goes back into the navel, it's sad to see that universe go away, but a whole new universe is going to sprout from it. Right? When the lotus flower goes in real life, goes back into the mud, a new lotus flower will eventually sprout from the seed, and so forth. And so destruction is not seen as a negative thing per se in Hinduism. They have an entire one of the main three gods devoted to dancing and destruction at the same time. And to me, this takes me a little back to the concept we talked about before, lila, which means play, right? That the enlightened or awakened or the person that's achieved samadhi and liberation from the cycle of life, from samsara, will be in a great state of joy and kind of play with his role as Maya, like it's a piece of clay. He'll have fun with it. And there's sort of an idea there in Shiva that there's a dancing, but that'll ultimately lead to a destruction that will lead to renewal. And so just to end on that idea, let's think about, because at first, nobody, a lot of us don't like when things end. But think of just in nature how oftentimes there needs to be a clearing out of the old to make way for the new. I mean, forest fires are an example of this, right? Sometimes forest fires, I don't know all the biological terms and stuff in terms of what happens to the animals and the trees and all that. But a science teacher will tell you the way a forest fire leads to renewal of new things in the next season that comes around, and that it's actually part of this natural cycle that leads to deeper growth. I often think about hunting. When I was a kid, I was very much against hunting. I had friends that hunted, and I always thought, oh, it's so terrible to take the life of an animal. And I still think there are types of hunting that are not good. And also, that was before I understood the way of an assembly line works with... okay, stop there for a second and come back. So I often think about the idea of hunting as well, which when I was younger and I didn't really understand the process, I just was very judgmental of people who hunted. I said, how could you kill an innocent animal this way? And of course, this was before I understood factory farming and how much worse those kinds of things are. And I still think some kinds of hunting are not good, but there's a reason why they have something called hunting season, right? Because if you do not kill a certain amount of deer and there's an overpopulation of deer, they can mess up the ecosystem and start eating other organisms and plants that mess up those, the organisms that mess up the ecosystem of those plants, and they ultimately make things worse for the forest. So there's an idea there that you need to destroy something in order to create something anew. We could think about it in our own lives. The end of relationships, right? The ending of friendships, the ending of times in our lives that seem like it's the end of the world. I remember when I first moved to San Diego, actually, and I was in a relationship had ended. I lived up in Northern California, and I broke up with my girlfriend, and I was feeling I had finished my degree up there. I didn't know what I was doing yet. I was feeling kind of depressed. I didn't know where I was going to go. And I kind of had my brother live down here in San Diego, and I had another friend or two down here, and I thought, you know what, I've lived up here a long time. It's time to start anew. And it was a real tough, difficult process. It was tough for me to even do it in the first place. And when I got down here, it was pretty tough to get my heels dug in, to meet new friends and to find a new place. And yet, look at me now. I'm here teaching philosophy in San Diego. And actually, that entire process would lead to a spiritual development that would ultimately make me interested in the very things that are leading me to teach this class. I don't tell that story to make you listen to my personal story, but to spark something in you. You might think of a time when you had a spiritual experience or an experience of death or loss or destruction that led to a greater thing. And that's really what the god Shiva is all about. Okay, so anyways, just to recap, those are the three main gods. They actually have a counterpart in goddesses as well. And there's, as I said, there's many other gods we could talk about. I'm not focusing on those because it's an Asian philosophy, not an Asian religion class. And also, many people who study or follow Vedanta, they see the gods as just emanations of the Brahman, right? The Brahman is the true thing, the only thing that truly exists, right? In a deep, deep sense. Everything else is an emanation of it, including the gods.